Nikolai Malamud, General of the Ukrainian Army and head of the Foreign Intelligence Service of Ukraine from 2005 to 2010, is joining our discussion. Nikolai Grigorievich, we are glad to welcome you, and glory to Ukraine.
Greetings, glory to the heroes.
Nikolai Grigorievich, taking into account the information that my colleague Yulia has just read, if we are talking about the redeployment of a certain contingent and enemy manpower as we understand it, as well as equipment. And let's put it this way. Considering that lately we have been observing very high intensity of clashes on various sections of the front. I recall that this week there were 267 or 268, but that's the approximate number, somewhere around there. In the past 24 hours, 187. Nikolai Grigorievich, in your opinion, are we currently observing the enemy's preparations for possible larger-scale offensive operations? Or, looking at it from this perspective, is he merely persisting with his current tactic? Essentially, to keep trying to systematically deplete the foundational strength of our state, well into the foreseeable future as well?
Well, we see that the enemy does not have the strategic resources for offensive operations along, as we have repeatedly noted, 8 operational directions. He periodically concentrates forces and resources in certain sectors. For example, Pokrovska, Mairohradska constantly, Kostiantynivka, and then alternatively Huliaipol. Before that, it was Kupiansk, then Lyman, and the southern Slobozhanska direction. That is, they are all trying to find weak spots, maneuvering their troops, but they are unable to generate large forces for breakthrough actions in 2 or 3 strategic directions at once. We see that it's not just happening right now. 165, 180, about 10 days ago it was 303 and 270. That is, he generates forces and begins attacks. Accordingly, we repel them, and now we've started to effectively target not only the front line, but also reserves and the rear areas. And it's especially important now that reconnaissance is identifying the system for preparing mass attacks. And here is the latest example, the most recent one. Our soldiers precisely identified the preparations for mass attacks, for instance, in the direction of Pokrovsk, Mirnohrad, and in other sectors, and prepared systematic strikes. Where the enemy was only just beginning to concentrate its forces as a result, their losses increased significantly. There were literally 500 people in total, 1,600 over the past day. We see 1,600. That's not 800 anymore, but twice as many. This is exactly the kind of effective work that allows us to neutralize these offensive operations. Well, 303, that's already a sign that this is a massive offensive, as they call it, a spring offensive. But this spring offensive did not achieve the successes that were expected. Although the objectives were once again set for the spring, even until April, to capture Pokrovsk. This is the 20th time. Separately, there were plans for Mirnograd, Konstantinovka to advance toward Kramatorsk, and of course to break through the Lyman-Slavyansk direction and encircle Slavyansk. And of course the south, where the enemy believed there was a very weak link, and therefore at this moment, strategic offensive operations were considered possible there. Not tactical, I emphasize, but strategic. And it turned out to be a miscalculation, you see. Not only was there no advance, they even pulled back in some areas. In the direction of Lepo, the number of attacks sharply decreased, literally in these past 2 days. In other words, they lack the forces and resources. That's why they need to build up. And there's another factor. In many cases, these were, of course, regular units, recently mobilized or recruited under contract with no experience. So we see what kind of factor this is. They are trying to gather more or less prepared units from all over Russia, even from the Far East. Marine infantry brigades, divisions, airborne troops, special operations forces, which are still present in certain sectors, and they maneuver them as needed. For example, from Pokrovsk, they were sent toward the Huliaipol direction, or now they've been brought back. At one time, this was exactly the situation near Kupiansk, where they announced that it had already been captured, but we pushed them back and forced them to retreat, moving them to other locations. In other words, the enemy does not have large numbers of professional organized units. They tried to quickly cobble something together, even a marine unit. We remember we destroyed them 3 or 4 times over different periods, wiping out up to 40% of their personnel. And that's by any standard, a withdrawal for a period of time. Equipment, redeployment, resupply, and so on. So in this situation, yes, they are still preparing new reserves. We already know that another round of mobilization has taken place. It has been declared by Putin's decree almost every month throughout the year, but now there will be a special spring draft. They will rotate out certain units that are stationed in the rear. A number of troops and units will be sent to fight in Ukraine. But we can see all of this now, especially among the military and even among many bloggers in Russia. According to our operational information, it is already clear. There is no euphoria, there is no progress, no successes. There are already real achievements by our armed forces. This undermines not only the fighting spirit, but also the overall morale, even among Russians, especially those who are directly involved in these matters. This is gradually affecting the Russian population. There is no longer that bravado of we will capture everything, we will soon advance, and the war will be over. Now people are dissatisfied that the war is dragging on for so long and that the losses are enormous. This is already something like a stab in the back for Putin. Of course, it won't happen quickly, but the turning point is already being felt. And at the front, there is now systematic work and miscalculations by the enemy. Not a single operation, I emphasize once again, has neither the autumn nor the winter nor the beginning of spring offensives have succeeded systematically. This is a fact, and at this moment, new buildups will not solve the problem. Even if they send a brigade there, or even a marine division, we are expecting them on the Zaporizhzhia front. We have finally gotten a handle on the situation, and we have created the conditions for effective defense and for launching counterattacks. Alternative strikes, such as the Alexandrovsk direction towards Pokrovsk and the mass destruction of reserves, this is exactly what we have talked about many times. Destruction in the frontline zone, at training centers, within the systems, so to speak, of coordination, both against manpower and accordingly against those reserves, especially with high-precision weapons at drone launch sites. This is now the moment of truth for our warriors. I think this will be a system that will not only hold the front, but will also systematically weaken the enemy and prevent them from advancing, taking into account the change in weather. As we have said many times, the enemy is waiting for it to be dry, for the greenery to appear, and then, under the curse of weather and natural conditions, to begin new offensive operations. We are also preparing for this. We have the forces, resources, and reconnaissance capabilities, especially to detect hidden concentrations and movements of troops and small assault groups. Therefore, I believe that none of the planned operations will succeed during the spring-summer period. We
still have a few minutes with you, so we have time to discuss one of the successful operations of the armed forces of Ukraine that you already mentioned. For example, recently in temporarily occupied Crimea, on the night of March 19th, the armed forces struck the innovation center of the granite production and technical enterprise. It is part of the Almaz-Antey concern, and as stated by the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Russian air defense systems were repaired and serviced there. Surface-to-air missile systems such as the S-400 Triumph, S-300 Favorite, radar stations, and also SAM systems. Of medium and short-range Buk and Tor. Nikolai Grigoryevich, how will such operations, or rather, how will the success of such an operation, yes, we are already talking about an unequivocal success, affect the situation at the front? How will it help going forward, since all of this is incredibly interconnected, even though, for example, this successful operation was carried out on the territory of Crimea?
But we are talking about the fact that now we are acting comprehensively, destroying, for example, the enemy's firepower, those same triumphs, those same, so to speak, Galks, radars, for example, various fire control systems or headquarters. And accordingly, at the same time, we are now destroying factories for repair and restoration. And Almaz-Antey as well. This is not only in Crimea, but all across Russia. It is the main enterprise for such activities and operations within the system of the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. That is why this comprehensive approach, destroying firepower, destroying delivery systems, and destroying repair facilities, specifically this plant, is what prevents the enemy from restoring them at all. That is, many of them, yes, they get damaged, but after 2 to 3 months, they're back in service. But this approach eliminates that possibility, the use of such means. That's why now there is a comprehensive effort, both on Russian territory and in the occupied territories, targeting key strategic sites, airfields, both strategic and tactical, launching missiles, and also against anti-aircraft missile systems. The destruction of air defense systems at fuel depots that supply the army, and of course at drone sites and groupings, which we've already mentioned, both in frontline and reserve zones. These are currently the main targets. And the facilities for transportation delivery, repair, and support of their operations, these are actually a secondary component, but no less important. I think this is a systematic approach. It will deprive the enemy of both resources and means, the ability to repair them, and accordingly, the ability to reinforce positions or strike groups, such as missile units, air defense systems, or likewise reinforcement units at the front. It is precisely this kind of model that will ensure a successful operation, which we have mentioned in various directions. A clear identification of the enemy's weak points is the prospect for an offensive, and of course the prospect of liberating new territories.
Nikolai Grigorievich, thank you very much for this conversation. Thank you for joining us. We were joined by Nikolai Malonoj, General,